just a couple more minutes for others to join us, and then I'm going to turn it over to Sheldon, who's going to moderate the session. This is an experiment. After this session and tomorrow, and it was open to, of course, anybody who wanted to join us after the program.
So can I ask a question, because I'm not going to be able to stay for the whole meeting?
Sure.
Sure, go ahead.
There were obviously Jews in the Southwest before the Galveston movement, because there were Jews to accept the people from the Galveston movement. What port did they come in on? Where did they come from?
Did you ask that question during our talk? Because there was that question, but we never got to it.
It was my question.
Was it? Okay.
Well, I mean, actually, I don't know, but I'm sure that, Galveston's a big port, and they probably came, they could have come through there. I mean, people, there were, actually, I mean, I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, they came through New York. I mean, I had my great grandfather came in 1857. I'm not exactly sure through which port, but it certainly wasn't Galveston. And he made his way. He actually, I think it's possible he came through New Orleans, because he was in New Orleans for a while. Then he did go to Galveston, but then he moved to Hallettsville, which is a small town, and opened a grocery store. But he eventually moved to Schulenburg, my hometown, became the mayor he was the third mayor of Schulenburg in 1888 or something like that. So, and my maternal grandfather also came from New York, and he was a peddler, and he peddled his way from New York down to Texas. So, I mean, they did come from, many different ports. Also from into Toronto and Charleston and I guess Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, I forget which
Philadelphia.
Is port city, Philadelphia. Yeah, so they're coming in all over. So, and of course through Ellis Island.
Everybody's stories tend to be the same. When we had the meeting with Tulsa, it was, how did your parents come and how did your grandparents come? And I'm looking at my phone because I have to check in for my flight in about 1 minute. How it was the railroad, and it was the small town. They could get a foot in and start a business and then grow it. It was like, it's easier to start in a small town than in a big town.
My understanding is many people in the 1700s who started in Charleston moved west, and each person started a small peddling and then started a small business, and then those people were pushed further west. So they could have all either come from New York or Charleston, anywhere on the East Coast.
Yeah.
And then they were there in the late 1800s.
Batya, where do you live?
Chicago.
Gail, does that answer your question?
Yeah, my grandfather, his father, they immigrated to Taylor, Texas, which is right outside of Austin.
Mm-hmm.
I've not been able to figure out why or how or anything about them. I can't find their names on any manifest. I don't know where they came in.
I have a follow-up question, actually. So in the west of Hester Street, it seemed that a lot of the impetus for people to leave Russia was this kind of terrible reaction to the Sino-Russian War. And I'm wondering what was happening in Germany around that 1870 time that inspired people to leave? Does anyone know?
The 1870 Franco-Prussian War, which the Germans won, but I think that there were a lot of unsettling things as a result of that.
And even earlier, because the German Jewish merchants were coming in, from the 1850s, 1840s even. And part of that was the Comuneros disturbances that were happening in Germany in the late 1840s. So that was, there was always a stimulus. I was going to mention, in terms of New Mexico, the people who were coming in through New York, basically, and they frequently came as providers for army bases. So as army bases, the very early German settlers. So as the army bases opened up more in the West, they needed providers. They needed people who were getting the merchandise for them.
Like Fort Union.
The Union Army, yeah.
Yeah, or Fort Union.
Well, Fort Union.
Yeah.
And so that was a stimulus that brought people then to New Mexico, for example. The very earliest people were suppliers for the army.
Or in El Paso, the Krakauers and Zorks came because there were mines in Chihuahua and in Arizona. And so they had a store in El Paso, but also in Chihuahua City.
So they're providers for the mining. Yeah, right. Yeah.
Is Rachel on? I have a question for Rachel because I missed the beginning of the Descendants.
Yeah, I'm on.
Here, yes.
I have a question. It was your grandfather who was involved in England. Is that in where?
He was actually he was a Russian Jew himself, and he was working in Kiev, and he would go around Russia to sort of recruit Jews who were, as I said, planning on going to New York.
And how did he get involved in that?
Sorry?
How did he initially get involved in that?
Well, it's a story that I find fascinating. A group of Zionists walked out of the Zionist Congress in 1905 when the Uganda plan was voted down. Because they was my great grandfather included was so pro Uganda, they thought, this is a great idea. We've got to find a temporary homeland for the Jews while Palestine is unavailable. So they walked out when Uganda was rejected and formed their own movement called the Jewish Territorial Organization, which was looking for a homeland for the Jews outside of Palestine. And then trying and failing to find a homeland for the Jews outside of Palestine, they were approached by Schiff, who said, let's collaborate on this. You want to find somewhere for the Jews. I want to get the Jews out of New York. Maybe we can meet in the middle somehow.
And how long did he do this for?
Sally.
Sorry?
That JTO was Israel Zangwill.
Yeah.
And how long did he do this?
How long did he do what?
How long did he travel throughout Europe doing this in Russia? How many years?
The Jewish Territorial Organization was formed in 1905. The first Galveston ship was, I think, 1907, and then it ended 1914. So 7 years and a little longer as well. I wanted to ask Cynthia and Alan, well, I guess it was a long time ago, decades ago now, that you made the film, but did you by any chance come across my great-grandfather's name in your research?
I'm sorry, I don't know what his name was.
Jockelman, David Jockelman.
Yes, yeah, that name does sound familiar. Yeah, where's that book? It might be in the
he's in Marenbach's book. There's a
book, yeah.
I actually spoke to Bernie Marenbach, and he said, oh, clearly a white lie and flattery, but he said, oh, I loved writing about your great grandfather, even though he makes, two or three short appearances in the book, but he was very nice about it. Yeah.
So, and I missed, where do you live now, Rachel?
Yeah.
I live in London, but I'm currently on a research trip in the US for this book. And I'm headed to Detroit, and then actually I'm coming to Austin next week, at the end of next week, to research at UT.
What's the
Oh,
book?
at the Briscoe or where?
Briscoe, and also the Harry Ransom Center and the Barker Center as well.
Barker. Okay, so are you meeting with Evan? Do you know Evan Hawker?
No, I don't.
Okay, he's our liaison at the Briscoe. So if you get on the Briscoe's website, and you'll see in the drop down, his name is Evan Hawker, Hockerer, and and he knows we're doing this conference. So tell him Sally said you called.
Okay,
I'm the archivist for PJHS.
Let me just pick it up for just a second, please. Ron, could you send Noel Pugach an email with the link to
Sure.
this, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
So Rachel, you can email him and tell him you're there, and he is in charge. He is our liaison for our archives.
Okay, great. And I'll tell him Sally Dreyer says hi.
Yeah, well, he'll see me at Thanksgiving. I'm stopping by to deliver stuff.
Okay, great.
I have a question.
Hello.
Oh.
That's you. That's your question.
What did you talk about the book?
Yeah.
Recently?
No, I didn't talk about it in my presentation just because I didn't want to bore everyone with it. But it's well, yeah. Do you have any question about it?
What's the book
What's
about?
the working title?
Well, I don't have a working title yet, but it is about sort of mainly two generations of my family, my great grandfather and his work, which I've been talking about, and then also his children, his three children, one of whom ended up in New York, ironically, one in London, my grandmother, and one in Israel, my grandmother's sister. So, and obviously all these this branching and branching and branching, all their descendants are the sort of three columns of descendants are totally different and have totally different self-identities. The New York descendants are New Yorkers to the core. I feel totally English, even though it's just a snap decision that my great grandfather moved to England, and my Israeli cousins feel totally Israeli and Jewish, all just because of small decisions of moving, getting on planes and boats.
So how did you get connected to New Mexico?
I spoke with Brian Stone, the historian, and he connected me with Betty, and then Betty told me about the conference.
How did you connect with Brian?
Well, he actually published a memoir written by a Galveston immigrant. If you haven't read it, it's amazing.
Which one, about Albert Gurwitz? About Gurwitz?
Oh, it's exactly, yeah.
Okay. His son just passed away.
Oh.
Neil was a member of TJHS.
Oh God, I'm so sorry.
Neil passed away about 3 weeks ago.
Oh no, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, so I read that book and I contacted Brian and just raving about how much I loved the book. And that's our connection.
And I'm introducing Brian tomorrow morning.
Oh, great.
Oh, interesting how you found Brian.
And for both Allen and Cynthia. And that is, if you had to do it all over again, in terms of, winding, hitting the rewind button a few years ago, we won't say how many, thinking about doing a film about Hester Street and the material that you covered in the film, would there be things you do differently as a result of some hindsight?
Well,
Oh, wait, are you on speaker? Yeah.
I guess the first.
Speak louder.
Yep. Can you speak louder, please? Thank you.
Yeah. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me now?
Sure does.
Okay. I'm not sure why we're having this trouble of
Now,
not saying. Yeah.
Just you.
Oh, just me. Okay. I really preferred the way we did it. I mean, I guess that's for me, as I think about that, I'm so glad that we did it with, trying to kind of have actors take us back to that period of time. I felt rather than kind of have people, interviewed talking about it, that was something that I felt for me as a filmmaker was really kind of, challenging and important. A way to keep people involved in the story. Cynthia?
Yeah, I think we would have, I mean, we just, we had a showing, I guess, I don't know how long ago. With COVID, it could have been a year, and I think it's a few months ago. And but it resonated with. No, it was before COVID because a woman came up and was crying. But I really feel like the way we did it, mixing the personal with the movement, shows what we all lose track of. We get involved in a movement and we don't look at the personal stories. And I think that I like the way that we did it. A film is a film. You can only give a certain amount of information. It's not a book. So there's, so like, the question that Rachel asked me about her grandfather, I do remember that name while we were researching, but I can't really remember what that name was in connection with. But there were so many colorful stories with Israel Zangwill especially. But that wasn't what the film was about. And the film was about how politics and a movement affect an individual. And so I'm proud of the way of what we did.
I just want to thank you for the way that you did it, because it brings, when you can get involved in someone's life and it's personal, you can get involved and it just is so much more meaningful. And with the Texas Jewish Historical Society, we have found that going to cemeteries and portraying the person as we're standing in front of their tombstone brings that person to life, brings that whole history to life, whereas it's much more interesting than just reading the tombstones. And so thank you. I have watched it many times, and Charles and I just watched it again yesterday. And it's like we love it every time we see it. We never get tired of it.
Thank you, Jen.
By the way, you two never age. You look wonderful.
I'll second that.
Cindy Freeman has her hand up.
Hi there. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone's what they've brought to this subject. I just wanted to share personally. So I grew up in Houston, Texas, and I've lived in New Mexico now for many years, so I kind of cross over. And my grandfather, my Papa Sam, came through Galveston Island, we think 1913 or 1914, as a teenager all by himself. And ended up in Houston, and on the same boat was a Mr. J.B. Greenfield, and they remained friends. They were the people who started what became Congregation Beth Yeshurun in Houston, but at first it was Adath Yeshurun. And so I have lots of stuff around that. I've been donating stuff to the archive at Rice University. And growing up in Houston, so stories of Papa Sam, my grandparents were married at Hotel Galvez in Galveston. And then, of course, that was our weekend go to the beach place, too. But we used to go to Bolivar Island, which was the immigration island people would just go, I mean, this was years later, that people would just go there and fish or, boat or go crabbing or whatever. But that was, and sometimes I'd look at it and I go, wow, that was the little island where those ships came to, where we're now just like hanging out and having a fun time. So I have this really lovely connection. So I'm appreciating bringing the rest of the historical value. Over the years, my grandfather brought all 9 siblings to Houston. It took a long time. The last ones didn't come until the 30s. And he eventually brought his parents too, who came around 1940 or 1941. My father of blessed memory says when his Bubby and Zeta came to Houston, they didn't speak English. And he was 12, and that was the summer he learned Yiddish. And they died when all the grandsons were away at World War II. And there's now 5 generations from living in Houston from that first teenager who came by himself to Galveston.
Cindy, I'm archivist for TJHS. Don't give everything to Rice. Can we have some in our archives?
Yes, of course. I mean, like I just came across the other day my grandmother's war ration book from World War II.
I'm going to put in the chat my email.
Okay.
I am leaving town tomorrow. Right after this, I'll be back in about 10 days. Email me.
Hey, do it.
Spread the wealth.
Okay.
Well, while we're making claims or while we're telling people about collections, I'm from the New Mexico History Museum, and we are right now building our Jewish pioneers collection, so mid-19th to earliest 20th centuries. So if anyone knows about any New Mexico Jewish pioneers material, I would absolutely love to hear about it. So
I've been I asked this question at the beginning of the conference. I'm gathering all the history I can, but my main focus is in the migration out of the small towns of the South. And I didn't know if this conference was probably not going to get to that, but is anyone interested in that or have any information about that?
We talked. Yeah, go ahead, Betty.
Oh, can you expand on that? Since our family represented a lot of migrations from small towns into Dallas, Fort Worth, and Austin, we might be able to help. But what in particular are you interested in?
Just the history of as they grew, everything seemed to collapse around the 50s or 60s in the small towns. And I'm curious to know, I kind of know why, but the history, people's, what happened. I actually have an African-American friend who spoke about, he's from Arkansas, and he spoke about the Jewish general store when he was growing up and how much he learned from the guy.
Here's
information like that. I know that.
Answer.
I'm sorry?
This is only one piece of the answer, but Kmart came in about the early 50s and made it very hard for Jewish merchants to compete. By the early 70s, I remember my father's cousin, Milton Harelik, saying, my customers can buy sheets at Walmart cheaper than I can get them wholesale.
I know that's why they had to leave.
The arrival of the
box store
stores that just killed small merchants. That's not the whole story, but it's certainly a big part.
I know that's what killed them all. I mean, that's why they had to eventually leave, but many of them, many went to Atlanta, and I guess they went to major towns in Texas. But I'm very curious to hear their histories.
It's opportunity. As small towns died, there's a quote I ran across in my research once that I never forgot. He said, "You'll never find a Jew in a dead town."
So, Bette, I grew up in a small town in South Texas, and before my brothers and I were born, there had been 25 Jewish families in Alice, Texas. But they never built a synagogue. They never purchased land because Corpus Christi was an hour away. So everybody was going to Corpus for high holidays, but they had, and I don't know why they never did. I have in my mother's actually cedar chest here, they made a huge one Rosh Hashanah, a huge tablecloth, and everybody embroidered names on it. But they, as the children, like everywhere else, as the children got over and they went away to college, they didn't come back. They just didn't.
Mhm.
And so the 25 or 30 families that were in Alice, the kids would go off to Texas or to OU or wherever they were going at that point. And
Well,
they
I
went to
understand. I
Houston,
just-
and they went to Dallas, and they went, you know.
Is there an oral history about this from the people that did have the stores? As I know that their children intermarried and they never came back to the small towns, or the stores went out of business.
I know that the Dallas Jewish Historical Society is doing a lot of oral histories. So you might look on the Dallas Jewish Historical website to see what families have contributed. I don't know, Vicky.
Our collection.
Do we have some, Davy Lou?
Yes, our collection at the Briscoe, the Dolph Briscoe Center on the UT campus in Austin, has a lot of oral histories that were taken by the very people about the very people you're talking about. Some of the small town merchants who moved to larger cities or stayed where they were and their kids didn't come back, and eventually they moved to wherever their kids were. But if you go to the Dolph Briscoe Center for American History on the UT
What's the
campus,
first name? Bob?
At University of Texas in Austin.
Right.
Dolph, D-O-L-P-H, Dolph.
Okay.
Briscoe.
Former
Are you
Governor
spelling?
Briscoe, Briscoe.
The Dolph Briscoe Center. And there, and just look at the listing that's there. It does mention oral history. Some of them may be individualized, but you can see how there's a lot, and you will find a lot of what you're looking for there if you look at our collection there.
And as I said to Rachel, you want to ask.
Does the Barker collection also have?
The what?
The Barker collection.
We don't have it
Same
at the
thing.
Barker anymore.
It's not the Barker anymore. It's the Dolph Briscoe.
Oh, they changed names?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, okay, because that's
They
what
They are not open to the public right now, but they will take requests, and you can, they allow, I think they said 4 people at a time to come into their reading room. You have to make an appointment, and also if you want any information to look at, you can look at it there. Vicki goes there all the time. You need to let them know, and they will gather it for you and let you
Batia,
get it there.
the same name that I gave to Rachel, Evan Hocker, you can ask him about the collection.
Evan,
EVAN HOCKER. If you look on the Briscoe.
Why don't you put that in the comments, because instead of repeating ourselves.
Okay, yeah, let me do that.
But
are you involved with the Southern Jewish History Museum in New Orleans? Do you have connections with them? What I understand,
No direct connections, though I have written to the executive director saying I'd like to have a cooperative. Yes, I haven't heard back from him yet.
Well,
because they tried to get everybody in the southern towns to all the history together.
Well, Texas is part of that museum, but I don't think we have. I mean, the Texas Jewish Historical Society, as far as I know, doesn't have any direct connection with it, but I have written to the executive director, just introducing myself.
Well, we do a little bit, but they've just started to include Texas information. Are you looking for Texas information only?
No.
Because you might contact them also in New Orleans, because they have for the South.
I just came here because my cousin's from Houston and she told me you were having a conference. So this
Yeah.
is my first conference. The other question is there anything from the other side, from the African Americans or other people in the towns that can talk about what it was like to have the Jewish people there? Do you have any of that history?
Wow, that's a wonderful question.
No idea.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe that's my
maybe that's a good research topic. You can follow up. I would like to ask the descendants group about the youngest generation in your families. You know, Jan and Betty, and I mean, how are they keeping up the family stories, and how are they relating to it? Because this is a question I think. As a Texas Jewish Historical Society, and I think New Mexico, how do we keep young people engaged?
Quick answer.
So if you could just address your story particularly.
Mine is short, so I'll start, and the answer is not very well.
Okay.
My kids identify as Jews, but I could not drag them into a synagogue and would only have to drag them kicking and screaming into family rituals like Passover Seders.
Yeah. What about family reunions? I mean,
yeah.
they connect with the family.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I asked my younger son just this morning before the panel about what are his legacies from the Galveston movement, and he very flippantly said, "I'm going to quit my job and get a banana wagon." Jan has a happier. Jan and Charles, I think, have a happier story.
You know, when I was asked to tell about, you know, how they connected with the communities, and I did tell about, you know, the first generation participating, the second generation, and then our generation. But I thought about this later. I should have said my daughter Debbie is a past president of her Hadassah chapter in Austin. And I'm very, very, very proud of her for doing that, because she did live in College Station, which does not have a large Jewish community, and could not, you know, participate except, you know, through Hillel, really. Our other daughter, Kathy, is Jewish, has raised her two children Jewish. They both, you know, as young people, they don't participate a lot, but they, you know, they're Jewish. Now, Debbie's two children also are Jewish. Our son, David, married a non-Jew. Their two children are not being brought up with any specific religion right now. So they know that they're half Jewish, and that's what they'll tell you. They are half Jewish. You know, when they will celebrate the holidays with us, whether it's on Zoom or if they happen to be here for Hanukkah, you know, but they don't do a whole lot. They do a little bit in their home.
You know, but I think those stories are the future stories of, you know, Texas and New Mexico history. I mean, I see no reason. I mean, I would like to see these young generation, you know, your children, your grandchildren, taking those stories and, you know, perpetuating them, and then someday become members of the Texas Jewish Historical Society, or tell those stories. I have those stories in my family too, of my brother marrying a good Catholic girl, and my niece and nephew not being raised Catholic, but they enjoy Jewish holidays, and they know that there's 50% Jewish. And so, I mean, I think those are family stories that are just as should be preserved as well as our ancestors. I'd like to see, you know, I'd like to see that perpetuated in the future for our organizations.
If I
Absolutely.
may,
Think about
There
the
is one
challenge.
Wait, we have a couple.
There is one more.
Linda.
One more thing I would like to add as far
And
as
then
our,
Linda, after you.
as far as our family Torah being passed around, I mentioned in my talk, it went to Connecticut. And then when it went to California, the young girl who read from it had not been raised Jewish. She was raised by a Jewish father, a non-Jewish mother. She didn't know anything about Jewish, but she had some friends that were Jewish. She went to their bat mitzvahs, and she decided she would like to be bat mitzvah. And so she studied, with someone for over a year and asked for the Torah, and the Torah was sent to her, and she read out of the family Torah. So that's why I said some of the younger generation might be bringing it back.
Mm-hmm.
Some that we thought were lost.
And they should be. Linda?
yeah, for those of you who are a little bit familiar with us, the New Mexico Jewish Historical Society, and if you're not, please go to our website. But what we did in the society, and I don't know if Noel Pugach is still with us or not, but beginning 20 some odd years ago, we started collecting oral family histories, and they are on our website. The earlier ones were video interviews of 10 to 12 descendants of well-known New Mexico Jewish families. And then in the last few years, we've collected another 10 to 15. And people like Noel Pugach and Harvey Balcalter and others have conducted those interviews. And so I would suggest that, for the Texas group, if you haven't, seriously thought about that, to form a group of interested people to come together and do these kinds of, capture these oral interviews, record them and put them on your website or to use. But we have maybe 25 or 30 family interviews, and plus our own collection in the state archives here in New Mexico. So that's something you might give some thought to.
And if I can mention, some of those actually are in this book. If you can see,
the back.
Pioneer Jewish Families in New Mexico.
Citation, and you can always.
David Lee, am I correct that TJHS had an oral history project at one point, and
that's where all these oral histories came from that I'm talking about at the Briscoe.
Okay, so maybe we could.
And there have been several that have been done even without a quote, an official project.
Yeah,
yes.
I don't know if you know that the Dallas Jewish Historical Society has a pretty vast collection of oral histories as well.
Yeah, I said that. Yeah.
And I think Rice University is also doing that.
Josh Furman there is doing that. Yes.
Right.
Sheldon, do we want to try to wrap things up?
I guess so. I think we've
waited 30 minutes.
We've passed our time. I think this has been great. Linda, I think this breakout session was a great idea. I think we've proved it.
It can work.
Well, and I think the chats have also proved very useful. We were going to do an evaluation, and we will, but I think people have been very spontaneous in reacting to the sessions. So that's good information that we can use and share.
We can save all the chat comments and questions.
Right.
Way of doing that so they don't get lost.
Yeah. You've done a terrific job. I'm really impressed.
Well,
Thank you very much.
I think I really appreciate all the people who participated, because putting this together, we weren't the content people, and we're working on the schedules, and to hear this today for the first time, I'm quite moved and inspired by it all. So I'm glad we were able to team up with New Mexico. I hope we can do it. I hope we can invite them over to help us with one of our projects in the future. But I appreciate everybody, being here today, and be here tomorrow morning early. Well, it's not as early in Texas. It'll be 10 a.m. in Texas, but 9 a.m.
In Texas.
Yeah. I know we're not the center of the world. I know, but we like to think we are.
We're in popular belief.
I know.
I just want you to see, I don't know if everybody knows, Jan, Davy Lou, Enid Class is on. She has been a member of TJHS for a very, very long time and has not been involved because I think she lives in New York. But she is on, and I just sent her an email. Hello, stranger.
I sent you a private chat, Enid, but you're not monitoring. But I'm glad to see you're here.
Yes, so am I.
Yeah, she had been in touch with me to figure out the time zone difference. So
yes, because she's in
it over email. But again, thank you everyone for joining us. Allen and Cynthia, thank you. All of our speakers, our panelists today. I think it was a terrific program, and we'll see you tomorrow morning.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Have a good evening.
Bye.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 What's a nice Jewish girl doing in a place like this? My life was quite different than that so-called average Jewish child.
By request, the TJHS Speakers Bureau presents stories about unknown Jews, well-known Jews, and more, either in person or by Zoom.
So perhaps I do have a story to tell, if for no other reason than it's part of the Jewish history of Santa Fe.